Forget your first frost date because you're about to add weeks to your growing season, whether you want to extend your garden for as long as possible or you're growing a fall garden. It's time to start thinking about growing under cover. If you've been thinking about building a hoop house but haven't quite figured out what equipment you need, how it works, or if it even works at all, then today's video is for you. This video has everything you need in it. It is a full course. So it's the equipment you need, where to get it from, how to set it up, and how to use it in a way that keeps your plants comfortable long past your first frost date or even your last frost date if you're watching this in the springtime. So you're definitely going to want to check this video out. I am going to cover hoop houses, whether you grow in the ground, in metal raised beds or wood raised beds. There's different ways that you can set them up that works for any of these growing methods. And if you've seen any of my videos before, you know I grow all three ways. So this means that I'm giving you firsthand knowledge of things that I've experienced and what works best. And if you learn this skill, this means that you're going to get weeks of additional growing time, whether it's now in the fall or in the springtime. If you're watching it, you can be starting weeks earlier. So I really recommend watching this whole video and gaining the skill because it's going to take your garden to the next level. If you're new here, my name is Bree from Urban Gardening Canada, and I garden in Ottawa Zone 5. So I did want to mention that this video was inspired by a viewer who asked a question about my hoops, and I decided that this would make a great topic. So if you ever have any questions and you'd like to see a full video on it, make sure to leave a comment below and let me know. And I'm happy to make a video if it makes sense and it's something that I'm knowledgeable about. Thankfully for me, I've been using hoops for years and years. I've had so many failures along with these successes, but otherwise this is years of knowledge that I've put together in order to make a hoop house that is strong enough to withstand the rain and the winds, because that's really important. In a perfect world, I would love to buy metal piping and bend it into shape because it's a more sustainable option, but I haven't had enough time to research if that's possible. Plus you have to build a jig in order to bend it into place. But I am hoping to upgrade to that in the future, so if I ever do, I promise to make another video of that. But in the meantime, I've been using this plastic piping. So this piping is plumbing piping and it's called PEX pipe. Here in Canada, finding products is a lot more difficult than in the US. And from what I've seen with US channels, they do have straight piping that can be bent into shape. However, here in Canada, any of the straight plumbing piping is not that flexible in order to bend it into these hoop shapes. And the only option that we have is a PEX A piping that comes in a large roll. Now the benefit about this is that it's flexible, but the downfall is that because it's coming in that round shape, it's really hard to take it back out of that shape. And so when you're trying to measure it out into a specific length, it's wobbly, it's rolling up, and it's really difficult to work with. And then depending on how big the roll was, if the roll came in a small shape like this, then this constantly wants to go back into that. If it came in a roll like this big, but you need it to be this small, then it keeps on going into that shape. And so it is a bit of a nuisance to work with this piping in order to get it into the proper hoop shape that you're looking for your garden. Because of course the piping is going to change based off of how wide your garden is, how narrow it is, or how low or high you want to make these specific hoops. So for example, on this garden here, my hoops are quite large, plus it's a 5-foot wide garden. So not only do they have to reach 5 feet across, but they have to be tall enough because I want it to be able to cover an entire cauliflower, an entire broccoli, or if I have peppers or tomatoes in there, I want it to be able to stay covered until the plants have grown quite large. So I made sure that my hoops were high enough for that. So the other benefit of these hoops is because they're plastic, you can cut them with any type of a saw. So we use a hacksaw. If you own a hacksaw or a table saw, like a miter saw, a circular saw, even a multi-use tool, you can cut these easily. So with the hacksaw, it's just manual. We cut them off. You don't need any fancy tools and they're not super expensive to buy. but just make sure, because these are plastic, you can't change the length of them. So it's really, really important that you make sure that you cut it to the right length, and I'll show you how to do that later in this video. So this is the first thing that you can find, and again, this is in the plumbing section. So next that you can see on here, I actually have a few connectors on here, but you can see that I have the hoop that goes around, and then I have a cross piece hoop that sits on top, and this is going to protect the weight of the poly plastic from any snow or rain, although there's only a minor amount of snow that it can actually cover. And so these are using different T connectors, or in this case, that's a 4-way connector, so it's an X connector. And again, these come in the plumbing aisle of Home Depot as well. These were originally the hardest thing that I was looking for. They're called IPEX, I-P-E-X, and I had a really, really hard time finding these, but thankfully my dad was able to source them for me. But this was about 5 to 6 years ago, and since then I have found them at Home Depot, and they're at the end of the aisle on a shelf full of boxes, so it's not right beside your piping, but thankfully you're able to find these now. You can get these off of companies like Lee Valley, since they do sell gardening supplies. However, they are significantly more expensive from Lee Valley than they are at Home Depot. So I really, really recommend looking for these at Home Depot or a local hardware store before you go to Lee Valley, because you'll save a ton of money. So you might notice on here that I have a 4-way connector here and here. And the reason that they are on here is because I keep reusing my pipes over and over again. I used this for a different project that needed the 4-way, and I don't need it specifically for here, but because they're the same size, they're really, really hard to move along the piping. And so I leave them in place because it's just too much effort to move them around, and it's just not worth it. So I leave them on there, and that's why you'll see there's a connector here, 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 2 more over there, and that's because of one of my failed projects that I'll show you at the end of this video. Will explain why I have so many of these on here. And then the next thing that you need is a way to clip the poly insect netting or the shade cloth onto your gardens. So this is where greenhouse clips come in. So these specifically are made to clip onto the hoop, and they hold your poly in place. The most important thing when it comes to buying your piping, your clips, and your connectors is that they all come in the same size. So if you buy a piping that's 1/2 inch, this needs to be 1/2 inch, and this needs to be 1/2 inch. If you buy 3/4, same, 3/4, 3/4, because otherwise you end up with something that won't connect. For example, these are 1-inch connectors, and this is 3/4. And as you can see, it just doesn't stay on it because they're the wrong size. So make sure when you are buying all of these different products that you are making sure that they all tie together and they're the same size. So as we go along in this video, if you do find it helpful, make sure to hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below on what you are finding useful in this video. It really helps me and my channel as I continue to grow, and I appreciate any chance you can get to hit that thumbs up button. So after you get these 3 items, the next thing you need to do is get cover. So it really just depends on how you plan on using it. If you want to use it as a cold frame or greenhouse, then you're going to want to get a poly cover. And if you're going to Home Depot, this is in the vapor barrier section. That's what this is called. So this is specifically for when you're building a house and you have insulation in the walls, you cover it in a vapor barrier after that, and that's exactly what you're going to be using. You don't need to buy some kind of fancy greenhouse cover from a greenhouse store. This just comes from Home Depot, and it's called Super 6 because it's a 6 mil poly. Now this is going to be the most expensive part of your entire purchase, especially if you're choosing a PEX piping that is only 50 to 100 feet, but otherwise this poly can get really expensive. So learning how much you need means you can keep the cost down. You can get 500 square feet, 1,000 square feet, or 2,000 square feet, but if you do go up to the 2,000 square feet, you're looking at a minimum of $100 for the roll, Canadian. And it actually goes really fast. So you really do want to make sure that you aren't buying too little, because then you're buying twice as much. You'd be surprised with just how little a roll of poly can cover if you have multiple raised beds like I do. And the thing that you can see here on this one is I have it installed backwards. So I have a ton of it hanging off the sides here, and I have too little of it on the side, so the wind is blowing right through it. That's not useful, so I'm going to show you how to close it up after. But right now this wasn't really necessary to be on here because it just had spinach and kale in it, and only today did we plant soybeans in it, so I do have to fix this one. So the second thing that you can put on it is frost cloth or shade cloth, and that is again what you saw earlier in this video as I was trying to frantically cover up my vegetables for the cold snap that was coming through. They're essentially the same thing whether you buy frost cloth or shade cloth. What it does is it's just a really light fabric blanket that covers your vegetables and protects them from frost, but it also filters out light so that way you can get shade on your plants. So this is beneficial for two reasons. You can use the frost cloth as a double layer inside of your poly greenhouse in the spring and fall, where you can lay it on the inside and then you put this on top of it where you don't need the hoops for the frost cloth, or you can cover it the way that I did, like a light blanket, just to help hold in 1 to 2 degrees of temperature inside of your plants, just to help prevent actual frost from hitting them. The other option is you can use it as shade cloth. So for example, if you're going through a heat wave and you have lettuce or spinach in your garden, you do want to cover them in some shade cloth because it's going to help lower those temperatures and stop them from bolting as quickly. It's not going to stop them from bolting completely, especially if you're in 40-degree weather, but it is going to slow it down. The other thing it's good for is tomatoes, because they are a Goldilocks plant. They want temperatures definitely above 10 degrees Celsius, but once you reach over 28 degrees Celsius, the tomatoes stop ripening. And so adding shade cloth over top of your tomatoes will help lower that temperature, so that way your fruit ripens quicker. The last option is insect netting, and this is specifically for plants that you want to keep insects out of. And it will be plants that don't need a pollinator, because you don't want to be covering plants that require pollinators like cucumbers or zucchini or any type of squash, because if they can't get access to those flowers, you're not going to get any fruit. Technically, tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers are self-pollinating. However, food lasts longer on the shelf and tastes better when it is pollinated by bees. This is a research topic, so you definitely want to avoid covering them if possible, but if you do want to cover them because you are overrun with potato beetles or tomato hornworms, then you can totally cover them in insect netting. Otherwise, this is really good for foods like corn, your brassicas like spinach or lettuce, and this is just going to prevent anything like the cabbage moth from laying any of their eggs. You can even cover it over potatoes if you wanted to. Now, not all insect netting is created equal. You can buy it off of Amazon. I have tried to buy it off of Amazon one time during COVID when I was in a pinch, and the company I normally buy it from was really delayed in shipping. But I can tell you that the quality off of Amazon is nowhere near as good as farm stores. So if you're in Canada, I love to buy my insect netting from William Dam Seeds. They have the best insect netting. It comes in farm length quantities at a super affordable price, so you can cut it up and put it over your different gardens. It has a great width and a great length, so you can use it on more than one garden. And it just is woven better. It has weight to it, so it sits better on your gardens. So I highly recommend looking there, or if you're in the US and you have a company like Johnny's Seeds, they'll also have insect netting there. But from what I've seen, they only sell in really large quantities for more expensive pricing. So you do, if you're in the US, you definitely want to shop around a little bit, but I really recommend looking for a farm store over Amazon first and foremost because of the quality. So when it comes to the poly, you might think that it's only good for spring or fall for your cold season crops, but actually it's perfect for times like this right now where we're past our last frost date, but it's not quite warm yet. So last year I planted my peppers in my raised bed here and I covered them in poly. So even though the temperatures were above 10 degrees, the days were above 20 degrees, this whole garden was 100% peppers. I covered it in poly for a couple weeks, and that raised the temperature at nighttime a little bit higher, and during the daytime it brought it from 20 degrees up to 30 degrees. and it was the best pepper year of my life. That 2 weeks of being under poly, raising it up to that 30 degrees, gave it a boost early in the season. These plants grew super quickly because they were getting greenhouse or hothouse temperatures, and my peppers were humongous. If you saw my pepper video, you'll know how big they were, but otherwise I definitely recommend checking out that pepper video. I'll link it for you below. For myself, I just want to document that this is the best pepper year I've ever had in my life. They're huge! And check this out. Look at all of those hot peppers. And then I'm flooded with jalapenos inside, all underneath. There's just tons, and I'm so excited. And then I got some more super hots here. It's amazing! But the poly has so many more uses beyond just being a spring or fall tool. So I really recommend trying it out in a couple different ways. So learning how to use hoop houses, poly, insect netting, shade cloth, frost cloth are such an important skill for a gardener because it's going to change how you grow your garden and take it to a next level. You can experiment with planting out earlier or later, and you're going to secure your garden from any type of pests that can ruin your plants. And all of these are tips that you'll find in my gardening course that I offer. It's an online self-paced course that has over 100 actionable tips, and that includes these hoop houses. So today's video is a small portion of what you can get in the course in order to take your gardening to the next level. And when we get cold snaps like this that are totally unseasonal, where we're 10 degrees below average, you'll already know what to do because you learned it in my course. There's lectures, videos, and worksheets that you can take with you into the garden so that way you're actually learning and it's not just theory-based. So if you're interested, you can grab that in the link below in the description, and you can even sign up for a free preview where you get a couple of the lectures for free, so I really recommend checking it out. Now let's get into how to actually set up this hoop house for success. So whether you grow in a container, metal raised bed, wood raised bed, or in the ground, this first way of setting up your hoops is exactly the same, and that is literally just jamming your hoops directly into the soil. So this is my preferred way to do it because I don't have to drill any holes. I don't need any special tools beyond cutting my hoops. And this is just the fastest way to build a raised bed. And because if you're in containers, you can just jam it into the soil around the containers. But the thing that you want to do first is put the hoops in before you plant your garden, if possible, because otherwise pushing the hoops into your soil can be very disruptive to the roots of your plants. Now, if you are just doing this for the first time, you want to make sure that you're cutting your hoops to the right length. And I already know right now that this one is too short, but it's just a instruction on how you can do it. So that what you want to do is make sure that your hoop is quite deep in the garden. I would say you want to have at least this much of your hoop. So I would say anywhere from 12 to 18 inches of this PEX pipe you want to have in the garden. So if you have the roll already set up, you're going to have a cut end anyways. And what you're going to do is you're going to jam the cut end all the way into the garden. And you're going to push it in as deep as you can. And now, assuming that this side is the uncut rolled side, you want to pick whatever height that you want to have on your garden. So for example, if I'm matching the height here, and then from here, you want to measure it all the way to the end of your garden. And of course this is cut so it doesn't look quite as good, but if you have the full roll, you're going to have the roll and you're going to stop it at a certain point, the 12 to 18 inches deep of your garden. And that is where you're going to mark it off to cut it. So this way you know exactly how long your pieces are going to be. And this garden is 5 feet by 5 feet and I have 3 hoops in it. So once you get the first measurement, then you're just going to cut 3 hoops to be exactly the same size. And that's how you're going to measure how big of a piece that you need to cut. And you can do this exactly the same for in the ground, in containers, and metal or wood raised beds. It's exactly the same process. Your second option is to secure the hoops on the outside of the garden. I personally, this is only for raised beds. You can do it for containers, but I wouldn't recommend it. So this is more a raised bed option. I personally don't want to do it on my metal raised beds because I don't want to be drilling holes into them. It's such an expensive garden, so the idea of altering it just like bothers me, and you need to have special tools in order to be cutting through the steel, especially depending on how thick your raised bed is. And you're also leaving the option for sharp edges wherever you're drilling the holes. Now, it's a lot easier to be doing this on a wood raised bed because drilling through wood is a lot easier. And if you do, you're going to want to buy these pipe clamps. And again, the goal is to buy a pipe clamp that is the same width as the pipe that you have. And so what it does is it just drills into the side of the garden, and then it's going to clamp on and hold it in place. And because these are made out of copper, they're very flexible. So I can just squeeze it, and now it's already squashed together. And so you can actually squeeze it until it's so tight on the pipe that it's not sliding anywhere. And then you're going to drill that into the side of your garden bed on the outside of your garden. And this is going to hold your hoops in place. So if you have a limited amount of piping and you don't want to use 12 to 18 inches inside of your garden, this might be a better option for you because you only need to attach it on the first couple inches of height on your garden, and that's where you're going to screw in the pipe clamp. So it's going to save you a couple feet per hoop if you do it this way. So this is a better option if you want your piping to go as long as possible and cover as much ground as possible. So one of the problems with doing this in the ground is that pushing a flexible pipe deep into the ground is really difficult to do. So it's not the same as doing it in a raised bed. So in that case, I recommend getting, whether it's rebar or bamboo piping. This one is jammed in here, but you can see that there is a bamboo stick that's inside of here. And so what you're going to do is you're going to find a stick that is thin enough to go inside of this piping, and you're going to hammer it directly into the ground first. So you want to get at least a foot of the stick into the ground and have at least a foot of it outside of the ground. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to slide the piping onto the wood. I'm going to protect my hands, and you're going to slide it in until it's fully in here. And then if you can get a little bit of the piping into the ground further into that stick, then that's going to secure it even further. But this just means that if you can't get the hoop directly into the ground, at least you have the sticks that have been hammered into the ground to help secure them into place. So if you're using shade cloth or insect netting, you don't need to have a cross piece on your garden because they're very light, which means you just want to put a hoop in the ground every 2 to 3 feet. The closer you put them together, the stronger the garden is. One of the benefits of having the cross piece though is that without it, the two end hoops can slide back and forth. They can tip forward off your garden or tip inward. And that's where the cross piece on top comes into play and where the T connectors come in. So once you have the hoops in place, you are going to want to cut a straight piece that goes the length from end to end. Or if you wanted to, you can connect them using the 4-way where you have a cross piece on top between each of the hoops. But I've found, at least for this short length of 5 feet, that having one piece was actually the better choice for making it more secure. So then you're going to slide these onto the hoops. And it's actually quite a bit of work to do it. But once they go on the hoops, then you can put your second hoop over here. And we have found that the best option is to actually screw it into place so that way it doesn't move. And we use these little screws that are just 1/2-inch screws. So these are a number 6 1/2-inch screw. And we just drill through the plastic to secure it, 1 onto the hoop and then 2 into the cross piece over there. And that's going to keep it extra secure. If you're growing in containers, you don't have to worry about this at all. All you're going to do is you're going to crisscross like this, the 2 hoops into the garden so it creates a dome, and then you're just going to cover it that way. So it's super easy in a container. Okay, so once you have your hoops in the ground, now you can add the insect netting, shade cloth, or poly. It doesn't really matter. The attachment is all pretty well the same. And that is going to be by using these greenhouse clips. You do have other options. You can buy massive butterfly clips if you wanted to, but this is honestly the easiest option. You can buy these at Lee Valley, but Amazon has them way cheaper, so most of mine have come from Amazon. I've had these for 5 years now, and it's just starting to split, so they've been actually pretty good at handling the outdoor weather. This is going to be your fastest way to secure the poly or any type of covering to your hoops. And then the next issue is how to keep it from flying away. So when it comes to adding poly, with shade cloth and insect netting, it's not quite as hard as it is with poly, but the biggest difficulty with poly is figuring out what to do on the end here, because all it takes is a little bit of wind and it's going to blow these up in the air and release all of the warm temperature from your garden out. So you have a couple different options. Here's the wind to prove my point. So when it comes to a wood raised bed, you can use a heavy rock, and you're just going to place it on the edge of your wood raised bed, and it's going to weigh down the end and it's going to keep it in place. The second option is to use a stick. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take the stick and you're going to jam it into place. And so this way your plastic can't pass the stick when the wind comes through. It's just going to hold it in place like that. You can put it in a couple different spots, but the one spot here will do. It's not going to keep it completely wind-proof or without wind getting into it, but it's a really good way, simple, cheap way to keep the end of your bed from blowing up. So I'm not going to put this on fully. This is just as an example on how to do it on a metal raised bed. You have the same options as you do with the wood raised bed, which is using a heavy rock, but it's going to have to sit on the inside of the soil, so you need to have space for this rock. You can use the stick the same way I showed you to, or you have two more options. The first one is if you have solar lights that are magnetic, you can just hold it on the outside of the poly and the magnet is still going to work and it's going to hold the poly in place. This I just found out when I was doing the shade cloth that you guys saw that one night, and this was a great option. And the fourth option, because metal beds are so thin, is to use these butterfly clips. So all you have to do is just pin it on the edge here and it's going to hold it in place, and they're quite strong, so that is not going anywhere. To me, I think that this is such an amazing way to hold them in place, and they're super secure, versus if you use a rock, sometimes the rock just isn't heavy enough and the wind is stronger and the poly comes up. But this butterfly clip is totally going to hold this in place, and it's such an affordable way to hold the edges of your garden. So these four options are not the only way that you can secure the poly to the garden. For example, you can have all of the edges lined with 1x2 wood that you can screw into the side of your garden, and that's going to keep it extra secure. So it's really up to you and what works best for you. These are just four really quick and simple ways that you can keep your poly attached at the edges, especially at the ends of the hoop house, which tend to be the most problematic with keeping the poly down. So I just want to talk to you about some of the do's and don'ts and considerations when it comes to using this specific type of piping. Now, of course, there are huge caterpillar tunnels or greenhouses that exist that can be 20 feet long by 20 feet high, but that's because they use a metal frame. So this is flexible piping, which means that there's actually a limit to how high your hoops can go before they're going to collapse. So I have in the past tried to build a hoop house that was big enough that I could step into it and feel like I owned my own greenhouse, and it collapsed more times than I could count. It collapsed from the wind, from the rain, from the snow, just from being too tall in general. No matter how many times I tried to brace the top and the sides of it, it just wouldn't stay together. And that's because it's made out of flexible plastic piping. So the truth is that you can just push this around and it's going to move. So there are limitations to how high you can make it. Now, The problem with also trying to make it too high is that you're going to waste material. So when it fails, you do have to cut it to a shorter size, which means you're going to end up with cut pieces that are wasted. So I really recommend being practical with the height of your hoops. But on the same note, you do want to make sure that your hoops are high enough. So you can see here that my plants are cabbage, so they're small, yet my hoops are really high. And the sole purpose of that is I am trying to make sure that my hoops are high enough that it gives my plants some space to grow. So whether I have a broccoli, a pepper, or a tomato in it, it gives it a lot of time to grow to a specific height where I can continue to cover it in poly, insect netting, or shade cloth before it does outgrow the hoops. It just allows me a lot more time. Plus I can grow a lot more spring and fall vegetables in here with this height, and I don't have to worry about it touching the top where it's going to get condensation. So although you don't want to build them too high that they collapse, you also don't want to build them too low that your plants don't have room to grow inside of them before they've outgrown the entire space. So the next thing is, because this PEX piping is fairly expensive and it is plastic, you really only have one shot at cutting these to the right length. So it's really important to take your time and get the right measurement. So you can turn to math to measure the half width of a circle based off of a diameter, but literally nobody wants to remember their high school math. So using the method that I mentioned earlier in this video is the best way for you to get an idea of how long of a piece you need to be cutting. It's just easier to use it as an example around your garden bed and mark it and cut it than it is to sit down with a calculator and do a bunch of math. Unless you're a mathematician and you really enjoy doing it, then go for it. But otherwise, this is the best option for us average gardeners. Now, the one downfall to waiting to know how long the measurement is until you've bought it is that you do have to hope that you get enough footage. So say, for example, you have a bunch of garden beds this size, you won't know how many feet you need unless you do it in advance using math or using, say, a hose with the help of a second person to hold it up and get the measurement. For example, if this is 5 feet wide by a couple of feet tall, then I'm going to assume that this is maybe a 10-foot hoop, let's say, for example. Nobody's doing math here. So my 3 hoops that are on here at 10 feet in length means I need 30 feet of piping plus the 5-foot crossbar, which means I need 35 feet of hooping. And that's just to do one garden, which means that if I bought a 50-foot roll, I'm only going to get one garden's worth of hooping before I run out. If I do a 100-foot roll, I'm almost going to get 3 gardens that is this size. So maybe choosing the 200-foot roll is the right choice for me because I have a lot of gardens that I want to hoop. So there is some consideration to knowing how big a piece is that you need. So it's up to you if you just want to buy all 200 feet and then build as many hoops as you can, or if you want to do the measurements in advance to make sure, if you're on a budget, that you only buy the exact amount of piping that you need. So another consideration is that this is plastic and it is terrible on the environment. And especially when you are cutting it with a hacksaw or even with a miter saw, is that there's a lot of microplastics that come off of these pipes as you're cutting them, and that is going into our environment. So if you are going to buy these hoops, make sure that you're going to try and use them for literally the rest of your life. So be really, really mindful and thoughtful as you're using them. Again, I would much rather be trying to use metal conduit, but I haven't had the time, the budget, or the research available for me right now. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to try it in the future, because that is more of the environmentally sustainable alternative. However, budget-wise, I'm not sure how much more expensive that's going to come out to, but it's just something to think about. So before I end this video, I did want to share some of the weird things that I've tried to build with this PEX pipe. I had the 200-foot roll and I just thought it would be really cool to build some things with it. And especially after I was inspired by other content creators on YouTube on things that they could build, I just thought it was super cool. And the first was what I mentioned to you before, which was a 5-foot tall hoop house that I thought I would be able to walk into. One of the struggles I had was how to build a door for it, and I wasn't sure if that was even possible. And not only did it collapse on me a million times over, but because it had originally been twisted up, it essentially like twisted itself back into place and collapsed on itself. And I woke up one morning and I saw it and I was like, oh, I don't think this is gonna work. So that one next, don't even try it yourself. And the second one was I wanted to build my own trellises, and I had seen those moon doors or moon trellises that are perfect, beautiful circles, but they're so expensive. And then it was right around the time where everybody started using cattle panels to make their own arches, and I desperately wanted one, but A, I couldn't find cattle panels in Canada, especially the kind that they were using in the US to make trellises, and B, even if I did find a 16-foot long cattle panel, how was I ever supposed to get that home? Because I surely do not have a 16-foot long trailer, and I wouldn't even know how much delivery would be coming from a feed lot or feed store or cattle store coming into the middle of the city. So I decided I was going to build my own trellises out of this PEX pipe, and that is exactly why there are 4-way connectors all over this hoop house, is because these pieces were originally used to build that garden trellis. And so to try and strengthen the pieces, I had bamboo stakes in the middle of all of them. I was connecting them. They were screwed in together and they looked okay. They weren't beautiful, but they looked okay. And I decided to grow loofahs and bottle gourds on them. And by the time the squash had grown to their full size, the weight of them literally just pulled it down. So when the arch was originally maybe like this high above my head, by the time summer was over, it was at my chin and I had to duck underneath it to get around. So it totally failed as well because the piping was flexible. It didn't work. So that was another failure of mine that I'm going to tell you right now, don't even try and do it. Really, this PEX piping, it's best for low hoop houses that are maximum maybe 2 to 3 feet tall with a hoop every 2 feet and a connector bar. That's the best way. This is the strongest version I've ever built. This one has never collapsed on me in any rain or nothing. This is the best one that I've done. So I recommend following the look of this one, and you can try and experiment other ways, but just be prepared that things might not go as planned. But otherwise, I really hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment below what you learned from it and if you plan on using this in your garden. And if you have any other video ideas, make sure to let me know so that way I can get you those videos out if they make sense and I just have the knowledge in order to do it. But otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day and check out this video here. Bye.